2024 F1 season hasn't even started yet, but we may have already witnessed the biggest drama that it has to offer, because Lewis Hamilton is going to leave Mercedes for Ferrari in 2025. It's the end of an era in Formula 1, but it's the start of season 2 of our F1 era podcast. Welcome back. We're brought to you by Nerve Podcasts and Nerve Radio. I'm Eden Hannigan.
I'm Rebecca Coulson.
And I'm Honor Dench.
And we're still in our F1 era.
So it's been a huge week for Formula 1 and this podcast because we have a Ferrari fan and a Lewis Hamilton fan in the room. So Eden, what's your initial thoughts on Lewis coming to your team?
Well, it was honestly a bit of a shock because, you know, we've heard for years now the rumours that Lewis will come to Ferrari at some point. Lewis wants to join Ferrari, and they've never really materialised until last week. And I was ill on Thursday. I was meant to be going back to uni classes, but I was very ill, so I was sat trying to go back to sleep, but scrolling through social media on my phone, and then I saw Motorsport magazine, who are probably the first real accredited media who have reported on it, and then it started getting more and more widespread as the day passed, and it was shocking to me at first because I thought this is not really happening. Lewis isn't actually going to leave Mercedes. And then it got confirmed later on in the day, and Toto met with all of the people at Brackley for Mercedes and told them that Lewis was going to be leaving the team, and it just went so quickly, and it's really, really weird at first because I thought something has happened here to make this happen so quickly and so drastically. But I'm really happy as well because we're getting possibly the greatest driver that the sport has ever seen in our team. We hopefully will get better development on the car because there's been debates for quite a while now with Sainz and Leclerc in the team about how if it's going to develop in which way of the drivers, because they have two very differing styles. So I'm quite happy. I'm looking forward to it, and it's going to be strange seeing Lewis in red, that's for sure.
I think the 1st of February 2024 is a date that all Formula 1 fans will remember. The news was crazy. They're saying Lewis is bigger than the sport because this was somehow global news. Everyone was reporting on it. And I know that me and Rebecca, we were in our lecture at the time, and it was Eden. She had messaged the podcast chat to tell us that Lewis was going to Ferrari. And to be honest, I thought she'd actually just fallen for the latest hoax. I didn't think it was real. I thought, there's no way he's going to Ferrari. I know he's always wanted to, but I thought he'll stick it out with Mercedes for a little bit longer. But no, I mean, people had likened it to Zayn leaving One Direction, which I think broke everyone's hearts again.
Broke my heart.
So, you know, this news was massive.
I do remember as soon as Eden told us about the news, I messaged my dad straight away. I was like, what the hell did I just read? But it does sort of, one thing which does confuse me a bit is Lewis has always said that he is loyal to Mercedes. You know, he wants to stay there. He wants to win titles, win races. But at the same time, Mercedes weren't delivering with the car. The past 2 seasons, they have really been quite poor by their standards. Not like poor on track standards, but just from what they used to be, you know, getting Lewis his 7 world championships. He's such a talented driver, and in many respects you can say he is bigger than the sport in his work with like LGBT groups and against racism in sport, and by many standards bigger than the sport. But he deserves so much more than what Mercedes were providing him in the past few seasons. But what I don't understand is why he went to Ferrari of all teams, because as much as I love them on the track, they have had their issues with their power units, engines, and loads of reliability issues. So I do wonder why he chose to go to Ferrari over any other team.
In my eyes, this is how I always thought it'd work. I know Lewis had the childhood dream. He said it was a childhood dream to drive in red this past week, so I always knew he wanted to go to Ferrari. However, I thought it would work out that, you know, it would go back to 2021, he'd have won his 8th with Mercedes, and he'd take a slow retirement, go to Ferrari and finish his career there and achieve all what he wanted to as a child and finish it that way. Obviously what happened in Abu Dhabi happened, and I think that's why he potentially stuck it out with Mercedes for a couple more years. There was a point to prove, there was an injustice to solve, there's, you know, Mercedes tried to do right by him, he wanted to stick by Mercedes and show that his loyalty there, and so I think that's why we got a couple more years of that pairing. However, it was a big injustice, and what's done is done, but Lewis does still won that 8th title, and realistically, as you say, Mercedes are in poor form, and that he's not going to get it with them, at least not now. I mean, I don't know what the car looks like for this season, and I know he wants to be the first driver to win a world championship in 3 different teams. That's why I think it's happened this. It could have been a nice slow retirement, and that's how I always thought it would work out, like a friendly way to leave the sport, in the same way Sebastian Vettel sort of went to Aston Martin, had a quiet finish. But I do think he's made the choice to go for Ferrari, which hopefully in my eyes I think means maybe the 2025 car is going to be incredible. He must know something we don't, and hopefully they are the ones that are going to give him another world championship.
But I do also want to ask you, Honor, as a Mercedes fan, do you feel like this has a lot to do with his pairing with George Russell? They haven't really been seeing eye to eye on the track. Do you think that might be a reason as to why he chose to leave?
Honestly, I do. I think the whole part and parcel of it, like, he needs to get his 8th is one reason he's looking elsewhere. However, some people have said that now this news has come out that Mercedes are going to favour George this season. But a lot of people have replied to that and said, well, they favoured him for the last 2 seasons. You have to remember that Lewis in 2022 took all the testing measurements on his car, and he tested out and trialled all these different things. George beat him that year, and so many people will bring that up and say, well, George beat him so he's a lot better, but will fail to realise that Lewis was actually testing a lot of strategies for the car. In 2023, I don't think they necessarily favoured George, but I think there was a lot of sour moments, and by that I mean when George DNF'd and Lewis got a podium, but the team failed to actually show up and celebrate the podium with Lewis. It was actually Ferrari who celebrated it with him. There are a lot of pictures of Lewis just sat by his car alone until the Ferrari team come over. And so yeah, I do think it was the team reacting and siding with George in instances like that that have led to maybe a broken relationship and him searching elsewhere.
It's also interesting as well because there are rumours going around that part of the reason that might have factored into Lewis's departure was that Mercedes weren't willing to give him a deal past 2026, and I find that quite interesting as well because we would have thought that maybe Lewis is coming to the end of his career, but if he wants to go beyond 2026 then wow is all I can say. But that's quite incredible. They didn't want to apparently offer him that, nor did they want to really offer him a driver mentor role, which I think, especially as he was kind of mentored and brought into Mercedes by Niki Lauda, who unfortunately passed away in 2019. He was such a massive inspiration and such a big influence on Lewis Hamilton throughout his time at Mercedes. I think that's probably something that stung him a little bit as well. And when you hear Toto saying it's not really a surprise that Lewis wanted to leave Mercedes for Ferrari despite only signing a new contract in August, it's quite confusing because you think something more has gone on there, and whether it's he's seen the car and he thinks I can't win in this machinery, or whether he feels like he's been pushed out or his requirements aren't being met by the team. It's definitely a fascinating one, and I don't think it's as nice on the inside as what it seems on the outside.
Well, it does seem like you mentioned that there were rumours that Lewis wanted a larger contract, and what he got offered by Mercedes was a 1-year contract with a 1-year extension fitted with multiple exit clauses, and he has used those exit clauses to leave after the first year. And I wonder if Mercedes, maybe when they were giving him that contract, expected him. Maybe they thought to themselves, oh, he can leave after the first year, maybe he might. And I wonder why they didn't try a little bit harder to keep him.
I just wanted to touch as well on where you were mentioning the extended contracts, and when you were talking about the sort of role model role, he did ask to be a ambassador. Well, it's rumoured that Lewis wanted to be a Mercedes ambassador until 2035, and that Mercedes weren't ready to commit to that. But interestingly is John Elkann, which is the Ferrari president, he has reportedly donated $400 million into Lewis's projects such as the Mission 44, and also offered him the option to actually be a Ferrari ambassador after his stint with Ferrari. And I just think it's, I guess, ironic in a way that his team that he's been with for so long can't let him be an ambassador. I think it's very clever on Ferrari's point. I think
Definitely.
To offer that is, it's almost like, oh, that's so salty, but it's really clever, and it makes for great gossip. But I just think to sort of snide Mercedes like that and to go, well, if they won't offer it to you, we will. Come drive for us. This is $400 million into all your projects, your Mission 44, your work with the LGBT community, and at the same time you can be an ambassador for us.
At the end of the day, F1 is a business, and these drivers in many respects are businessmen themselves. Their agents are businessmen themselves. You know, Formula One is a business, and it's a multi-million dollar, multi-million pound business. And Ferrari have taken advantage of this, and they've gone, we know what Lewis wants. We know he isn't getting it at Mercedes, so we're going to give it to him, and we're going to provide him the contract he wants, the ambassador roles he wants. We're going to make him feel wanted. And Lewis has taken the best business move for himself, I think.
I definitely think so as well, and I think it's really interesting that Ferrari have offered him that ambassador role, because it's been something that I've been saying for years that they need. We look back to the championship fights that they had. Well, I mean, in the end they didn't really turn out to be major fights, but in 2017 and 18 with Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari, I personally think that something that helped Lewis along the way that Sebastian Vettel couldn't benefit from was the presence of Niki Lauda in the garage. And I think an obvious Ferrari mentor would have been Michael Schumacher, but of course for obvious reasons that can't be the case. That's something, his presence would have been a massive part for Sebastian Vettel, and it obviously was as well when he was first coming into the sport and driving for Red Bull. But that's something that Ferrari have really missed. They've not had that kind of role, and I don't know whether that's through like the arrogance of Ferrari. It's like just driving for our team is enough of a gift, and it's enough of a thing to make people want to drive and win a championship. But it's not enough, and I think Lewis having that role will help not only Charles in the future, but I think it will help whoever is next after Lewis or next after Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari garage. And benefiting from a 7-time world champion is something that, obviously as a brand is massive. We spoke about their stocks going up by 13% when the news was announced.
But yeah, by 1 p.m. it'd gone up by 13%.
It's incredible. They've got it spot on with the marketing. They've probably got 2 of the most marketable drivers on the grid, and they have Lewis committed to being an ambassador, and I assume he'll help grow the team. And I'm glad that Lewis is being able to get that role, because he is somebody that the sport needs. Even after he retires, he needs to have that presence, and I was kind of worried that maybe he might draw away from it and go into like his other projects, but I'm glad that Ferrari are supporting him with his projects in motorsport, and I'm glad that Lewis won't be leaving motorsport as soon as we think he might.
I'm so happy that he has gone to Ferrari, because to me that's him staying in the sport. I sort of assumed that he'd retire after Mercedes, and the way it was going I thought that'd be very soon. And Lewis is my favourite driver. He has been since I was about 4 years old. I'm so happy that he's continuing in the sport, and this move to Ferrari just means that I've seen him live for the last 2 years, but it's a chance for me to see him live a bit more, a few more times. It's a bit of a full circle moment. When I was a little kid, me, my brother and my dad used to sing a few songs about Ferrari and how much we didn't like them because of the rivalry between Vettel and Lewis. But it's safe to say I've completely turned around. I absolutely love Ferrari now. I'm in a Ferrari top today for the podcast to support them. But yeah, I'm really grateful for them for giving Lewis the opportunity, because you never want to see your favourite driver leave the sport. But also he does so much good for the sport. He's really, really encouraging women to be in the sport. Every time you see him talk, he always says that we need more women here, especially as this is an all-girls podcast. I think it's really important that we have idols like that are continuously vocal about it. Stay in the sport, and hopefully once he leaves, either someone else will start stepping up and making their opinions heard, or the message that he leaves behind will be sort of ever present in Formula One.
I do see that happening with Lewis, and I also see that because one day he will retire from racing, and I do see that he'll still maintain a role in F1, whether that will be an ambassador role or it will be, maybe he might come back and do like some punditry. You literally never know. But I feel like he'll always be an advocate for more women in F1, more women in motorsports, and more people from different ethnic backgrounds, different race backgrounds. Like, he is such an inspiring person, and it was like when Seb retired, it felt like there was a hole in the sport, and that hole needs to be filled. Hopefully Lewis can encourage more drivers to take that space.
You're definitely right when you say about there being like a hole in the sport, because it's the way life works, but the younger drivers don't tend to speak up as much. If you look at when Lewis and Sebastian were younger, they probably didn't speak up as much as they did when they were older. You get older and you get wiser, and so their opinions are very loudly heard, given the fact that they were coming to, or are coming to, the end of their careers as a race driver. But it would be nice to hear those voices throughout the younger drivers and the legacy carry on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, to be honest, it was one of the things that made me start rooting for Lewis, because I was the complete opposite to you. I would not be happy anytime I saw Lewis Hamilton winning throughout. I think I have a vendetta against people who just keep winning in the sport, because from about 2014 all the way through to the end of 2019, I didn't really like Lewis Hamilton at all. But then in 2020, when it got restarted after COVID, when we had the whole Black Lives Matter and taking the knee, it really made me respect Lewis a lot more, especially when you would look at the drivers who chose not to kneel, and I saw Charles didn't kneel, and I saw Max didn't kneel, and to me that always left a sour taste in my mouth, because I think Lewis Hamilton is the only black driver in the sport. He must have felt so alone at that point, seeing the two stars of the future not wanting to kneel with him, no matter how much he tried to explain to them that how important it was and things like that, and they didn't listen. And I just thought how alone he must have felt, and how much it must have driven him to get that 7th title, and to make sure that those projects that he's setting up do get somewhere, and that the next generation of drivers from ethnic minorities do have that support, because it's not being shown by the drivers of the future. I think the only ones really that we do see supporting these causes are George Russell and also Pierre Gasly, but they're not just Charles Leclerc and the Max Verstappen. They're not the people, maybe George Russell to an extent, that you don't really think that they're going to win a world title. So it is kind of alienating for Lewis, I imagine, and that probably gives him the drive to carry on, and hopefully we will start seeing Max and Charles speak up eventually, or
if not, just a woman in the sport and she can speak for herself. That would be nice.
Yeah,
one day.
We'll get Jamie Chadwick or Marta Garcia.
Oh, I hope it's Jamie Chadwick. I love her.
Honestly, it's needed at this point, because we need somebody to speak their mind, because while the sport is improving, it's still not a completely safe space. So hopefully we do get those changes in the future.
Well, speaking of change, Lewis is obviously very vocal about matters offside of the track, but he is also very vocal about things on the track and about the mechanical side of F1 too. I find it very interesting that Loic Serra, who was the Mercedes head of vehicle performance, was poached by Ferrari for 2025, and for the W13 and W14, Sarah had said that Mercedes were doing the wrong thing by using the long wheelbase and floorboard. Lewis was someone who very strongly agreed with him, and I just find it very funny that they are now going to be paired up in the same team. Eden, as the Ferrari fan, how do you think Lewis coming to the team will benefit you on a sort of mechanical side?
Well, it's great for me, because with the greatest of respect, people are talking about, what about Carlos Sainz? Carlos Sainz is being pushed out of the team. I don't really care. It sounds really harsh, but bear with me.
Brutal.
Because Ferrari had a winning car towards the back end of 2019. Of course, there was the debate over, was the engine illegal? Then in 2020 and 2021, they did not have a winning car. In 2022, when it was being developed by Charles Leclerc, that he was in a championship fight with Max Verstappen. Of course, for various reasons, he was never going to win that fight, because Red Bull had a better car. Although it was a lot more inconsistent in the first half of the season, it was a better car, it was a faster car, and they also have better strategists. But then, midway through the season as well, they decided, instead of developing in the direction of the driver who is leading the championship, they're going to develop in the direction of Carlos Sainz to make him feel a lot more comfortable. And I would get it if him and Charles Leclerc had similar driving styles and similar ideas on setup, but they don't. And I'm a Charles Leclerc fan, of course, as is obvious by the multiple episodes and the multiple times before that I've spoken about Ferrari. But they've been developing in the wrong direction for a while, and that's because they wanted to make Sainz more comfortable in a car that never really suited him. And in my opinion, the Ferrari has gone from a car that is capable of challenging for a championship to a car that's not, and that's because they've developed for the wrong guy. By Lewis coming in, and by Frederic Vasseur coming in, and by poaching Sarah, they hopefully will start to be going back in the right direction and swing towards winning the championship more. My first thought when Lewis came in was like, we're finally going to have development that suits at least one, if not both of the drivers, because either Lewis will help Charles Leclerc, or Lewis is obviously capable enough of winning on his own. And I think Charles and Lewis have similar-ish driving styles, so that if it's slightly off from what one of them likes, the other can still adapt. It's definitely going to benefit the team a lot more. There'll be less of a war and less of people arguing on Twitter like, oh, this driver's being favoured, oh, that driver won through the team and not through his own ability. So hopefully it will work in the way that benefits Ferrari in the long run, and hopefully will bring championships either to Lewis or to Charles.
I do feel like we might also see Ferrari, not to dampen anyone's, spirits, but we might see Ferrari enter a new cycle of who's going to actually be... I know they said they're not going to have a number one driver, but I feel like whenever teams say that, they still do have a driver who generally takes the lead. And I wonder if that will be Lewis, because he's older, he's more experienced. And you have Lewis on one side who wants his 8th World Championship, who deserves his 8th World Championship, and in many respects, as much as I'm a Red Bull fan, it can be argued he was sort of robbed off of a couple championships.
Agreed.
But then you also have Charles, who is dying for a championship, and he does deserve it. He has an incredible racing style, but it just never really seems to work out for him. And I wonder if you might see a sort of competition between the two drivers of who gets to win what race, who gets to pass the other, and who ultimately can take a world championship, maybe in 2025 or maybe a couple years down the line. And I do feel like there might be some tensions brewing there, which might have also happened between George Russell and Lewis Hamilton as well.
I think the difference is both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc have proven themselves as team players time and time again, whereas their current teammates haven't.
That's true.
And I think that's something that will also help. They've got a balancing act there, whereas before, I don't necessarily want to say it's the egos of George Russell and Carlos Sainz, but I definitely think it kind of plays a part in they think that they are better and they are the future of the team, and they think they bring more back in, and therefore they think that it should be tilted in their favour and things should be done for them, and that's not the case. Whereas I think Lewis and Charles both have one goal in common, where they want Ferrari to be winning a title. And to be honest, I don't think either of them would really care who wins it, just as long as they are in contention of winning it. I think if it came down to it and it was obviously the two Ferrari drivers going for the championship, of course they would care. But I think they're a long way of getting to that stage further. First they need to build a car that's capable of winning. But I think they have two drivers there who are very, very willing to play the team game. We've even seen it when Lewis was going for his championships. I remember in Hungary, I want to say 2017, long time ago. But he was allowed to be let through by Valtteri Bottas with a hope of catching Kimi Räikkönen for second. That didn't happen, and on the last corner of the last lap, he let Bottas back through to take the podium, which gave Sebastian Vettel an extension on the championship lead at that time, which Lewis Hamilton eventually clawed back. But it just goes to show that he is willing to play the team game, and if it doesn't quite work out in a way that Lewis hopes, then he is willing to give Charles the benefit. And I'm sure that's 100% the same with Charles, because we saw it, in Singapore this year. We've seen it many times over the last couple of years. So I do think that part of the tensions in both of the respective teams at the moment come from the other parties rather than Charles and Lewis, and hopefully that they will be able to build on that, and I really do think that they are capable of doing it.
I actually think this could be it's definitely a very strong pairing in terms of driving ability, but I think there's already a bond there. They both were disqualified from the same race last season, so I'm sure they've got some mutual ground. I think there's whether he takes the number one role and does it that way, or whether they race alongside each other. Lewis is a very, very wise driver. He's been in the sport since 2007. He knows so many tricks of the trade. He could almost mentor Charles in the sense that he knows he's retiring soon. If it was to come down to the two of them fighting, I think they'd lean in favour of Lewis, get him his 8th, because in a sort of tactical way, once he's got his 8th, I think he'll retire. But I do think it would sort of work as like a mentor partnership, and Lewis could help Leclerc so that once he leaves, he's the dominant force then, and he leaves Charles in place as the number one driver, as the dominant force of the sport, someone there to compete with Max. I really think it could work out in a way that they learn so much from each other. Leclerc learned a lot from Vettel as well, so to learn from another world champion and race alongside another world champion, I think it's going to be an absolute great partnership. But I also think it really reflects on Leclerc as a driver. Lando Norris, in an interview recently, once he'd signed his multi-year deal with McLaren, he said that he wouldn't want to race alongside a teammate such as Max Verstappen because because he's a world championship. I can't remember the words he used exactly, but he almost seemed like he was scared of the challenge and he didn't want to take it on. And I think it's quite ironic that only a week later Leclerc was to be Lewis Hamilton's teammate, and that's a 7-time world champion. It's really brave. It has put him in a really good light considering what Lando Norris said the week before.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he has a good track record, you know. He did very, very well against Sebastian Vettel in his second race in Bahrain, a race which is still heartbreaking for me that he should have won in 2019. I remember in the early laps of the race he had pole position, but Sebastian Vettel got past him because of the nature of how that track is. And I remember Ferrari telling him to back off on the radio. He didn't listen. He went for it. It was probably a decision that made him in contention to win that race before the car failed. So I think it does reflect very well on Charles because he is willing to take the challenge, and I think people are underestimating Charles a lot. I think people think that I know a lot of the media recently have gone against Charles Leclerc for some reason. They seem to think that he isn't as strong a driver as everyone maybe makes out to be. I don't think that's true at all. I think he's got pretty much the full package. I think the only thing that's missing is his wet weather driving skills, but we don't really get many races like that in Formula 1 anymore, so it's not too big of a deal. I do think he is definitely set up to be able to take on Lewis, and I think he could beat Lewis in a head-to-head. I don't think it's really a bold thing to be saying. He's not doing his reputation any harm by staying on board with Ferrari, because of course he would have signed his Ferrari contract knowing that Lewis was going to come in and be his teammate, because he's signed for multi-years, and he's not going to shy away from the team that he's wanted to drive for forever just because Lewis Hamilton's come in. I think that it's definitely a good pairing on paper. Whether it turns out that way on track, we'll have to wait and see in 2025.
I am really excited to see how things progress in that Ferrari team, and I'll definitely be watching them very closely. But there's a couple of things that have kind of stuck in my mind that I just want to talk about, and one of them is to digress a little bit. When you mentioned Lando Norris and some of the comments he made about racing against world champions, and it does make me question, he's not the youngest, but he's one of the youngest drivers on the grid, and he signed a multi-year deal with McLaren, and he's not racing against the world champion, but he's racing against Oscar Piastri. So it does make me wonder why he would sign such a long contract, and why he doesn't want to take the challenge of maybe racing against somebody who's a little bit more experienced.
Taking on the challenge of racing alongside a world champion is what makes a really good driver. Look at all the other, look at the people that have done well in the sport. They've always been paired with a former world champion.
And he's only racing against not a rookie, but against a very new driver to Formula 1. So how can you really test your ability if you're racing against somebody who hasn't been in the sport as long as you?
I think Piastri is a surprise package, and I think I said it last year and I'll say it again this year. I think Piastri will win a race before Lando Norris, because I think he has that desire and he has that determination to race against the great champions, whereas Lando Norris seems to, like, it's a running joke on Twitter that Lando Norris fights his teammates harder than what he fights Max Verstappen, but with all of the comments being made, well, it seems to be true, and it's a difficult one because you don't want to say like it takes away from any of Norris's credibility, but you do really have to question that whether he was saying it, you know, because of the curse of the second Red Bull seat, or if it was just he doesn't believe that he can go up against Max Verstappen. And if that's the case, then that is a character weakness, I think, because you should back yourself to be able to go against Max Verstappen.
There is another angle to this entire story though, and that is who is going to be in the second Mercedes seat in 2025. Rebecca, who do you think it's going to be and why?
I think it's going to be Alex Albon, because it's taken F1 far too long to realise this man's potential. He is a stunning driver, and he's just never had the machinery to really prove himself. And I do genuinely feel like if he does take that, presumably George Russell's going to go into the number one seat in Mercedes, as he has experience with the car. So presumably Alex Albon's going to go into the second driver's seat. And I do feel like he is really going to shine in that car, and I do feel like people are going to start realising, wow, this guy actually, he's got a lot of talent, he is amazing, and why did we shove him in a Williams for so long? I don't know.
Eden?
I have a list of names.
Okay, yeah.
One of them is Alex Albon for the reasons that you mentioned, and also I think people are unfair on Alex Albon because everyone obviously remembers that horrible stint at Red Bull, but people forget that he first went into the Red Bull seat halfway through his rookie season. He was going up against Max Verstappen, and the Red Bull car, again, was not that good. It was not particularly a great car in 2019 and 2020. It was a race-winning car. Alex Albon was 1.5 years into his F1 career. He was not in a position to be winning races or, in theory, really getting on the podium. I think he got his one podium in Mugello in 2020, and that was a very well-earned podium. It didn't really look like he was ever going to get any more, and he's spoken in the past about the toxic environment at Red Bull, and I think going to a team like Mercedes where he has a friend in George Russell, of course they won't be friendly on the track, but I think it's something that would benefit Alex Albon a lot more than what his time at Red Bull did. Fernando Alonso, I don't see happening. No. I feel like people want it to happen, but I don't see it personally.
I do feel like about Alonso, one of the reasons why Hamilton wasn't offered a longer contract was because of age. So signing Alonso would be a bit counterproductive.
Yeah, exactly. I think the only reason that they would potentially do that is if they truly believe that Fernando Alonso could win a drivers' championship, but I don't think so. In all honesty, and I think this is probably a controversial opinion, I genuinely believe that the start of last year wasn't down to Fernando Alonso still being an exceptional driver. I think it was down to Aston Martin just having a very good car. And don't get me wrong, in part it is due to Fernando Alonso and also I guess Sebastian Vettel's development before he left, but I don't think that Alonso was doing anything exceptional with the car. Some people may disagree, but I don't really see that, so I don't see any need for Mercedes to get him. But the other options that I'm looking at, Esteban Ocon, because he is a former Mercedes junior. He got his career in motorsport because of a phone call he made to Toto Wolff. Mercedes haven't really forgotten that, but he's comfortable with Alpine, and I don't know whether it's a risk for Ocon to make a step up into a top team, because he is somebody who goes onto the radar quite a lot, Esteban Ocon. I think you always see him hovering about a 5th or 6th in the timing tower, and yet they'll still always mention his teammate or somebody else who's just below him or just above him in the graph. I think he's very underrated on that aspect, which makes me think he won't be going to Mercedes, but he could be worth a shout. Similarly, Mick Schumacher, I don't see happening, but he is there as their test driver. He obviously has Formula 1 experience. I think it's a risk. Not as risky as the other name that I'm about to mention, but he knows the team, he knows the setup, so he knows what would be expected of him there. And then the last name is a guy called Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who is about to go on into his first F2 season. He is the Formula Regional champion from last year. He's starting his F2 season with Prema, and I believe he's only 17 years old. And he's a Mercedes junior as well. Allegedly, they have done some pre-season testing for Formula 2 and Formula 3, and he was seconds clear of the field, which I don't know how founded those claims are, but if it is, then in a series it's meant to be a spec series. It's not really a spec series, but we say it is incredible. So he could be a name that they're looking at, but I am very negligent of Mercedes to replace arguably the greatest driver we've ever seen in the sport with a 17-year-old kid who would be going into his rookie season. You're going in to replace a 7-time world champion in a race-winning car. That's a big thing, and I don't think that's the kind of pressure that Toto or Mercedes should and would put on a 17-year-old.
I completely agree with the Albon argument. I think it will go to Albon. However, maybe a year or two after that, I really think Oscar Piastri is going to be in a Mercedes. Obviously he's the best rookie McLaren have had since Lewis Hamilton. I think their careers could be very similar, and I really like him as a driver. Also would like to, just in case it does happen, I want it to be me that got it right. I do think there is a chance Mercedes could be the first team to bring in a woman. You have to remember it is Lewis leaving them, and if he's campaigning for this, maybe a clause in him leaving is that they give the seat to someone of a more diverse background, and hopefully that'll be the way they go. I highly doubt it, but you you never know.
It's curious that you say that, because it's literally just come out today that the F1 Academy is going to be getting super license points, but they are giving 10 super license points to the winner of F1 Academy, and you need 40, I believe it is, to obtain a super license to drive in Formula 1. And I think that's insane, to be honest, because we want to promote women in sport, and then you're giving the category you've made specifically for women only 10 points when F4 and F4 equivalent teams are getting more. It's very disappointing to see that, but hopefully they are just doing it as an incentive as F1 Academy progresses, and hopefully the drivers progress because they get that free seat in Formula Regional. Hopefully we'll start seeing the points increase, and hopefully we'll start seeing more and more women eventually in Formula Regional, then Formula 3, then Formula 2, and then hopefully one day we will get to the point where we see one in Formula 1.
Now, there is another very important group of people with an opinion on who could be getting that Mercedes seat, and that is our lovely listeners. It seems that everyone is tied between Albon and Alonso, which are names we have mentioned, although we didn't seem that it would be Alonso, so it's very interesting. There's a lot of people arguing that it could be. Someone has said Sainz, and someone else has said that they would really like to see Mick in that car, which I agree with. I think I'd really like to see Mick, although we did say earlier that Williams is sort of like boot camp for Mercedes, and I think Mick needs to do his year in Williams before he progresses up to Mercedes. We did also ask our viewers what they think about the move of Lewis to Ferrari, and the word interesting has been thrown around in quite a few answers. I don't know how to take interesting. I don't know whether interesting is good or interesting is bad. I think interesting just means we'll have to wait and see. They're worried about who's going to be the first driver and saying that neither will be the second driver, so we're not sure how that's going to go. I think that's a really good point.
Someone went, he looks so good in red. I definitely agree, he does.
Yeah. He definitely does. All the AI pics that have come out, they look amazing,
I haven't
really.
actually seen any
Haven't
of those,
you?
but I imagine, like, I remember when Charles Leclerc was first going into Ferrari and I saw, like, his season in Sauber, I was like, I don't know how he's going to look in all red. And then they posted the pictures from the post-season test, and I was like, oh yeah. Okay.
My favourite graphic at the moment is the Sky Sports one where Lewis is in a Mercedes suit and he sort of has this like ripple effect over and it changes into a Ferrari suit. It's all over TikTok at the moment because they keep doing the Hamilton the musical times Hamilton the driver edits, so I'm seeing those. One of our viewers thinks that this means Ferrari have definitely aced the 2026 new regulations. I think that is a very strong shout, probably a very true shout. I think that could be correct.
Or something must have happened at Mercedes for him to activate his exit clause. I do believe there was there a testing of this year's car recently, or
although I don't know if that was before or after he activated the clause,
but that is something to definitely think about, that maybe something happened behind the scenes. Maybe Lewis took a look at the car and went, nah, not this year. Not again.
I have to say it was unfortunate for the social media admin who 3 days before the news had tweeted a picture of Lewis in the new car testing it. It didn't seem to look all too good that 3 days later it came out that he was changing teams. Obviously social media's been absolutely hilarious the last few days. I think my favourite tweet is I don't care how many times I've said Ferrari have had illegal engine and have cheated, by God do I hope they continue to do it from 2025. So. Now that is all from us here from the first episode of the brand new season of the F1 era. If you want to join in and have your opinions heard, head over to our social media pages. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, X, Spotify and YouTube at the F1 era. The season has kick-started, it is underway. We will be back next week with a new episode.
This will be on the liveries that are coming out this week. We'll be having a look at those and having a discussion about what we think.
And if you want to contact us, you can email studio@nervemedia.org.uk.
Thank you so much for listening. You will hear from us again next Wednesday.